Hey Blazers, Miss UAB here, and welcome to our third event of BlazeHer Week. I'm so excited for today. We are going to be doing an Adjust Your Crown panel questions. As you can see, we have a few panelists here today that I'm super excited to hear from. But I really wanted to say, if you guys haven't seen our other events, you can go onto our Miss UAB Instagram or on Engage and subscribe to those. But I first wanted to ask everybody to introduce yourself and ask what your role is on campus.
I'll start. My name's Kiera Walker. I'm a clinical counselor. I work in the Department of Student Counseling Services. My role here is triage and assessment coordinator, and I help get students connected to counseling services as needed.
Hey everyone, I'm Kristina Canfield. I use pronouns she and her. I'm currently the Substance Abuse Prevention and Recovery Coordinator. I spend half my time working with wellness promotion, coordinating our alcohol and other drug education and prevention programming, and then I spend the other half of my time with student counseling services, overseeing our collegiate recovery community, which supports our students on campus who are in recovery from substance use disorder.
And my name is Angela Lee. My pronouns are also she, her, and I served as this year's Miss UAB and the Executive Vice President of USGA.
Angela also just got nominated to be president of USGA for next year, so congratulations to her. But to get in more about the panel, we're gonna go over some mental health questions as well as some platform questions that I have for you guys. My platform's all about the importance of voting, so I really wanted to hear your guys' perspective on certain things. But the first question that I wanted to ask is, why is practicing wellness and self-care important while in college or in general? And why is it important to take time to adjust our crowns?
I guess I'll start with that. So you speak of wellness and self-care. I think first, self-care has really become a buzzword, I would say in the past couple of years, and it's often defined in a very superficial way. And so I think part of wellness and just like really understanding what self-care is diving deeper than doing things that make you feel good. A lot of times we associate this with taking time out for ourselves, which could look like shopping, getting nails done, exercise, and all those things are good. Nothing is inherently wrong with that. But what true self-care is, it's doing things that you need to do and sometimes not having the motivation to do it. But by doing it, it actually makes things go smoother. And for example, it's also doing nitty-gritty things like going to bed at an earlier time, washing clothes when you need to, scheduling, making your schedule in a way that you can manage your time. These aren't considered fun, but they're necessary because they help your life run smoother. If you are a parent and you're also working and you're a student, you have multiple hats. It's taking time to figure out, okay, I have these different things pulling from me. How do I meet the needs of those that are around me, have expectations, but then within that, how do I also take care of my own needs? What we tend to do, especially as women, is this natural idea of nurturer and giver, and we often do that to the detriment of ourselves. And so self-care, part of that is identifying your own needs. I think we have glorified this idea of I meet the need of others, even if that's to the detriment of myself, and that actually isn't helpful. And really what it does is it kind of shortens your lifespan in the long run. And so what you really want to do is, it's important to try to meet the needs of others, but you have to also grasp and take time to figure out what your needs are, what does that look like, and how do you meet those so that you're in a position to actually adequately meet the needs of those that have those expectations.
I love that, and Kiera is so eloquent. My favorite definition of self-care is actually it's not about escaping my life. It's about creating a life I don't have to escape from, which is exactly what Kiera was referring to. And I'm a working mom. I wear several hats just at UAB alone. And if I have a job where I am put into a helper position, or I'm constantly giving to other people, which is a part of my personality and a strength that I possess. However, I can't pour into my students if I'm not somehow finding a way to refill Kristina. And so it's really important that I do things, even simple things like, you know, I have a friend who's no longer with us, but he used to say brushing your teeth is a power move. And I understand that. It's like doing those things, even, you know, going to the doctor, making sure I'm physically well, making sure that I'm doing everything I can to take care of myself, not just mentally, right? Because we get mentally exhausted, especially as students. And if you're a student who also has to work and care for others, you know, physically, I have to take care of myself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. There's this whole, you know, there's many facets to wellness. And often I find we'll focus on one thing, like our mental health or our physical health, but there's so many different facets to wellness. And so how am I filling all of those buckets? Social, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, all of those different things.
Both of them just, you know, you guys just took the floor with that. As a student, I think I'm still trying to understand what self-care is, because this year it has impacted me so much, and that I've never experienced this before, and the importance and the need to taking care of myself and prioritizing my health. And as both Kiera and Kristina said, it's just, we are, as women, we're nurturing and we have these deep feelings, and we always like to make sure that people feel heard or connected. And so we give so much of our time that it does impact our own health and priorities. So I can't say that I am a know-all, see-all, but I definitely understand what it means to prioritize my health this year in terms of taking social media breaks, or giving myself that time to eat and having no distractions, focusing my time one at a time, not multitasking. I think I'm so busy always multitasking that it takes away from me actually living in my present state. So I am still learning and growing from it, but Kristina and Kiera just spot on.
Yeah, I want to say I really love what you guys said. And so I guess really leading into our next question, you guys all talked about how women, like, we nurture, and, you know, a lot of the time, especially if you have children, that's like a mother's instinct where you automatically want to take care of everybody. And I feel like all women, like you said, that we all have that nurturing aspect. So what do you think is one of the biggest challenges that women face when it comes to physical and or mental health?
I think right now it's a lot of the messages were sent by society, you know, that we are somehow supposed to be able to take care of all of these things, but also make it look easy and don't forget to smile, you know, and how dare us complain because we've been given a spot in the workplace and we asked for this, you know. And so that's that message I think we're, you know, at least I interpret we receive a lot from society. And then, you know, on top of that, as a drug and alcohol educator, as a person who works a lot with people struggling with substance use disorder and those who are in recovery, as a person in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder myself, there's this other layer too that I see where in my circle, we talk a lot about wine mom culture, where it's almost like women are sent this message, especially through the media, a lot about how we're supposed to, you know, take time out and relax with a drink. You know, it's always around like wine or having to like escape our life by drinking. And what that's actually created is a whole generation of women who are struggling with alcoholism more than ever before. And so there's these really mixed messages that I think we receive from society, that we're somehow supposed to fulfill all of these roles, make it look easy, don't forget to smile, but hey, you should also drink. And that's really problematic. You know, I've worked really hard to create a life I feel like I don't need to use substances to escape from. It doesn't mean I don't stress out, I do. So I think that's one of the things that we struggle with, and that I'd like to see continue to change, you know, like that messaging towards women around, you know, how those expectations of fulfilling all of those roles.
I think Kristina's did a good job of saying that. I was going to say the barriers are just unrealistic expectations. It is it's amazing. And I think it's one of those things where, you know, just because we may have done things in the past and have succeeded doesn't mean we need to continue to put ourselves in the positions to do that. And it's amazing. I think it speaks to the resilience of women that a lot of people have been able to meet some of those demands, and we're still here. But then what we don't look at is, but to what cost? You know, one thing that comes to mind is Shonda, who does like Grey's Anatomy and all the different shows. One of the things she said is, like, when I'm on set, I'm not at home with my daughters. I'm missing their graduation. I'm missing this. Like when I'm in these different roles, there are trade-offs, right? If I'm with my daughter, then she mentioned, like, I'm missing the last day of one of the actors who's ending their time there. And so we live in this world of FOMO, right? But part of what she was trying to say is, there is a cost to everything, you know, like being present and showing up. That means you can't do that everywhere in all aspects, but I think we're expected to, and we try to do that. And so we feel the feelings of being overwhelmed. We feel, you know, the high anxiety. And then, as Kristina said, what do we do when that happens? We go and drink to numb it. We go and drink to, like, pull it down, or we use other substances. I will even say, once I started counseling, I had to be very intentional to limit my drinking, to make sure I wasn't using that as coping. And it had nothing to do with, like, addictive tendencies per se, but it's more of what she stated. It's a part of the culture. It's, you go home and you have a drink with dinner. You go out and you go to a bar with, like, it's so part of our nature that we don't think about it. And that's how it can lead to, it starts off there, but now you're depending on it because that's what we do. And so I would also say part of it is reflecting on what's important to you, reflecting on what your values are. You know, it's not really about healthy or unhealthy. It's how you define it. It's what you put on it. What are your own goals? You know, I had to decide for myself, okay, I'm going to do this to be intentional and strategic, but that may look different from the other person. And so it's not about giving this one size fits all for everyone. It's their expectations that are there. Some of those I'm going to have to say no to. Some of those I'm going to have to say, that's not realistic. I can't do that. And be okay and assured within myself that that's fine, and not walk away feeling guilty or selfish because I didn't meet a need that was there. There are going to always be needs there. I don't necessarily have to be the one that steps up to do it. When I'm able to, I can, but that goes back to taking care of self. It's realizing I can fit this in, so yes, I will, or, you know, no, I can't. And therefore, you know, I kind of set that boundary. And I really feel like boundaries are not discussed enough as it relates to taking care of self.
Not gonna lie, I just forgot what the question was, but just harping off of Kristina and Kiera, in psychology, there's this term called role conflict. And I think that we all have so many roles on our plate. And for me, just experiencing like what it's like to be a leader, but also be expected to be a student and be empathetic and have your own personal life. It's so hard to balance everything when you feel as if you're being pulled from all of your limbs. And not to mention this year with the toxic cancel culture of just doing something that someone disapproves of and it makes you feel worse about yourself. It's very unhealthy to be in that realm of trying to fit and mold to the expectations of what people want you to be. So I definitely agree with Kiera and Kristina when they just talk about societal standards of how people perceive women and like all these roles that we need to play, but at what cost?
And I can definitely relate to that. You know, I'm a full-time student. I work a part-time job where I do 30 hours a week. I'm at an internship 3 days a week also. And then I do stuff for Miss UAB. So I'm very, very busy, and I really know what it's like to be overwhelmed. And so, you know, I do struggle with having time to myself and, you know, feeling like, you know, I have time for self-care. But at the end of the day, I know it's more of finding ways to take care of myself to where I don't feel like I have to be busy all the time. Because that's what it is. When you have that downtime and it's finally, you don't have anything to do, you're like, well, what can I get ahead in? And it's realizing that, okay, we just need to take a break and really just take time for yourself. Like whether it's taking a nap. I don't really get to do those anymore. But just enjoying that time for yourself. I spend a lot of time with my cats as well. I want to apologize because one of them keeps running up here. But I guess moving on into the next question. So what are some things that you guys do to practice self-care or, to feel empowered? We touched on how, drinking and going out in that societal norm kind of is not the best way. It's not necessarily bad, but we see how it can be, people can become dependent on that. So what are some better ways to practice self-care?
For me, I'm very schedule oriented. And so I hate if I don't have a plan. Although this year now I'm understanding like sometimes it's good not to have a plan and just to enjoy the moments that I'm living in right now. So personally, I like to take dedicated time because I get a lot of emails just regarding different things. I like to have set times in which I answer them. Maybe it's just twice a day, but it's definitely not every single moment when someone emails me, I'm like responding back immediately. And then having no distractions when I eat. I am very guilty of FaceTiming or like messaging people, looking on social media, but sometimes just take that break that I need, just focus on my meal. And I think that's just having those little moments to yourself are just very beneficial to improving your self-care and your mental health.
Yeah, I think part of this, again, going back to the one size fits all, I think part of like self-care is figuring out what going back to needs. For me, like I'm an introvert, and so I don't necessarily want to be around people. And this past year has been easier. And so in that regard, having time to reflect, and I'll say part of it for me is reflection and processing. I'm very much in my head. I'm a thinker. Everything is cognitive. And that helps because I feel like we don't do a lot of that. Tiffany, you mentioned how busy you are. I feel like we got to a point where our schedules are very busy, but when we have that downtime, that's when those uncomfortable negative feelings come up. And then automatically what we do is do something else so we don't feel it. And honestly, that's when you get into trouble. You have to take time to figure out what is going on. Like these emotions are communicating something to me, positive or negative. And part of what you need to do is process through what's happening in my life. We're bombarded with a lot of things. We all have family, as you stated, the different hats you wear. Oftentimes, it's taking time to just process. And that's really a lot of what counseling helps students do. Like you're just kind of on. That when that switch goes off, the value is in what you're doing versus who you are. And so when you take that step back, it's figuring out like what am I giving to society outside of just like my works, right? Like my own intrinsic value. How do I feel about myself? And separating what I do from who I am. Our identity is so caught up into works that when something doesn't work well, now we have those negative emotions and we're so down on ourselves and we're not having self-compassion. We're not, we're trying to practice gratitude. And we try to like do all these things, but a lot of it is normalization. One, you're not happy 24/7. It's an unrealistic expectation. And so it's recognizing how to take time to really just think through and process where you are as you're on the road to where you're going. And so I think for me, honestly, that's how I take care of myself. It's not just about like, yes, I have expectations. I have a job, I have family. So I engage in those things. But really what makes me feel grounded is like making sure I'm good with myself. It's making sure that I feel like I'm on steady ground, and that can look different day to day getting there. And so that's why I kind of say it's very individualized. It may be something external, but a lot of it for me is actually internal. And I feel like a lot of the messaging we get is we need to do all these external things to take care of ourselves and feel good, when sometimes it's not external at all. It's really what's going on inside, what's in my heart, what's in my mind. Are they aligned? Are they not? Am I living congruent with my values? Do I know what my values are so I can even make decisions that align with it? These are some of the things that lead to actual contentment and feeling like you're living a fulfilled life. And that's the part that's missed out on. You're not going to get to that idea of contentment and living a fulfilled life with just doing things that you enjoy. That's a part of it, but it's a very superficial level. And so I kind of want to harp on that related to just taking care of self. It's so much deeper than just the external things that we do.
Absolutely. And unlike Kiera, and Kiera knows this about me, I'm very much an extrovert. I am like an extreme extrovert. And so I derive energy from other people, from being around other people, from large crowds. I love when we do events and things at UAB, because it's like when hundreds of students show up, I get that energy. And that was not accessible starting a year ago. And so the past year, and the point I want to make with this is, self-care also changes over time, and what worked for me 4 years ago, 2 years ago, it doesn't necessarily work today, because I'm a human and we evolve over time and our needs change. And when everything started happening with COVID last March, and things started, I know everyone on this call experienced this, things started dropping off my calendar, those things that this extrovert really, really looks forward to. And I was like, oh God, oh my gosh, I'm going to be by myself in my own head, and I don't know for how long. And there was this great realization that maybe I've been doing exactly what Kiera just expressed, that for the last several years, it was like busy, 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 without much pause to really look intrinsically at Kristina. And so there was a bit of a crash at the beginning of COVID, where I had to reevaluate, what does self-care look like for me? Is it, hopping on a plane and getting to go to all these cool places and meet cool people, or is it taking a pause right now and looking at, again, what I need in this moment to just be well? Something I've been very, very open about with the students I work directly with my colleagues and my peers, is last June, I actually made the decision to check myself into the UAB psychiatric hospital for a week, to just take care of me, and that is self-care. I felt a lot, and my lack of self-care led up to that, but the asking for that help at that point and saying, like, I'm not okay on the inside anymore, I think I need to take care of me. It was huge. It was a huge moment. And I share that so openly with students and with my peers and colleagues, because the immediate feeling that I felt was shame, that there was something wrong with me as a woman, as a mom, as a professional, that I had allowed myself to become so depressed. And that there was no shame in that. There was a lot of courage in asking for help. Once it became very clear to me I couldn't do it on my own. And so, going through that and then getting into a routine of therapy, that's been a big piece of self-care for me, is making sure that I have that pause to just focus on me. I have a space where I can focus on me, especially as a giver, as a person who's consistently giving to the people around her. There has to be that pause to fill me up. So that's another big thing that I've experienced, is it just looks different from year to year. And sometimes we're going to hit a wall, and it's about, where do we go from there? And the last year, that's really what it's been about for me. And I can tell you, the person on this Zoom call right now is completely different than the person, on a Zoom call a year ago. And it's because I've taken the time to just take that pause and refill myself as much as I need to.
I want to thank Kristina for being open with that. One of the things I always tell my clients is, helpers don't get discount tickets. Like, you have people that come to us seeking support. We have our own personal lives, and we go through the same things some of our students go through, like we're not immune. And so even though we're in a helping role and we're there to help support, we also need support. And we even more so, because we have our own lives, but then we're also in a position to help others. And we can't do that effectively, as she stated earlier, if our cup is half full. And so if any more so, like, we got to be intentional to take care of ourselves, to put ourselves in a position to help others. But I think oftentimes you get looked at as kind of, quote unquote, the expert, or like having all the answers. And sometimes, it's not realized that we got people, at home that are going through the same thing. We've experienced grief, we've experienced death, when the pandemic happened, it happened equally, right? Like, it happened to everyone. And so we're create, we do our job in a way where we don't bring our stuff into the room per se all the time. And that's intentional because it's not about us. But then there are moments, as she stated, where you self-disclose to try to bridge the gap and say, like, I'm also telling you what I know, not just like what I read in a book. And so I just highlight that because we also have our lived experience. In addition to COVID, there's been a lot of political issues that have occurred, social justice issues that have occurred. And so it's affected our aspects of identity in different ways, as an American, as a female, as a minority, like all these different things that intersect who we are as people has been impacted. And so I think it's important, even more so, that we highlight that because of the year we've had and a lot of things that have occurred, that people have struggled and are struggling, and that's fine. It's like almost like you want to give them permission to not be okay, because we live in such a society that wants to paint this face of everything's fine. And it's like the meme where the little bear is sitting at a table saying everything's fine and everything's on fire. Like, that is a lot of us. We really got to get to a point where we have supports in place to when we're not okay, we're able to reach out to those people or those resources, whatever it might be, and say, hey, I'm not okay, and get beyond the shame and guilt that comes with that. And she's right, it's there, like those feelings are there. And what I hope for the future is we're able to push through those emotions, but still get what we need. Because it's nothing wrong with needing something. We're humans, we're made to connect, we're made for that level of intimacy. And trying to be an island is not going to get us any close to our goal or any close to being a healthy individual.
I also want to talk about support system, because I thought I've always had one, but I didn't know that there were so many layers of what a support system looks like. And so for me this year, it was receiving professional help. And like how Kristina was saying with her own mental health struggles, students obviously have felt the same way. We have our own struggles that we deal with. And what I found was we need to start normalizing resources on campus, because, and I do see a shift. I see a shift where people are now talking about mental health and emotional resources. And so I am more comfortable to talk about my own struggles and connecting students with other resources on campus that allows for help for them to receive. And so student counseling has been amazing for me. And I encourage anyone who needs to talk to somebody that there are people out there who are willing to listen to you. There's also offices. I think of the Office of Student Outreach. And so if you deal with loss, this office will email your professors for you and let them know your situation so that you don't have to exert that energy to do so whenever you're feeling so down. But there's so many resources on campus, and I really hope that they become more normalized in the sense that people are okay with talking about it and saying, like, I need help. And we're taking steps for that, for sure.
Absolutely. I just want to say that the lead up to that question, the way everybody answered it was so amazing. I really loved hearing about how everybody feels about that. I will say I can relate to, all of that in the way that I would tell myself, oh, I don't have time to be sad. Oh, I don't have time to do that. I have all these other things. And it's coming to the realization that asking for help or getting help is, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. And it really does need to be more normalized without us feeling shameful for failing or for thinking that we can't do everything. And going back to, all of us having those different roles, none of those roles are as important as the role you play as yourself. We need to be able to kind of take our life into our own hands. But in doing so, we need to be able to make sure that we're actively doing things to take care of our mental health and our physical health as well. So I guess, moving along onto a lighter note, I guess getting more into the women's side of the questions now. So we talked about how in the past year, we've seen so many movements, whether it be social justice movements, and recently with all of the shootings that have been happening recently. And so a lot of the times we face all these different stereotypes, and we can see how people act out on those. And so I wanted to ask you guys, what are stereotypes, that are associated with being a woman have created barriers for you in your life?
It's interesting you asked that, because I had this thought this morning. I was reflecting on some different meetings and things I've been a part of over the last several weeks. And I've noticed that there are times, it's not all the time, but there are still times where if I am in a meeting with a male counterpart of mine, like I can say something and it either be misinterpreted or unheard. And then like my male counterpart say pretty much the same thing, and then suddenly it's heard. And so I think that bias still exists, and I see it play out quite a bit, in different things that I work on, where it's, am I being heard the same way as maybe a male colleague of mine when we're working on, the same project. And so that's still a barrier. And I'll tell you, internally, I have felt a lot of pressure to pursue a PhD, just because I feel like if I have those credentials behind my name, then people would pay more attention to what I have to say as a woman. And I hate that. I hate that I'm not the only woman who feels that way. I've had a lot of women in my life say that was the only reason they pursued a PhD, so that they would be taken seriously in their field. And I'm here to tell you, like, I don't have time for a PhD right now. That's my hard boundary. I'm a mother to a 5-year-old. I wear multiple hats in my role here at UAB. I have to make sure I'm taking care of my own recovery. I do work in the community. And so it's like, am I going to pursue a degree just so people will listen to me? Like, no, I think that's my hard no. But those boundaries, those barriers, they still exist. And I'm still experiencing them fairly regularly in society. And then, of course I can, look, y'all, I try not to read the comments on any social media, but I get sucked in every now and then. And I'm just reminded of of just the toxicity that still exists in our culture. And anytime I feel like sometimes us as women stand up for ourselves, we automatically get labeled like dirty feminists, like that's a dirty word. And it's like, yeah, I'm of course I'm a feminist. Of course I'm going to stand up for like my values and my needs, but somehow it's still a dirty word, and it's not looked at as me advocating for my needs. It's somehow looked at as, me advocating for something special. I have to just bring it up because it's huge. Is the stuff happening on social media right now with the NCAA basketball tournaments. I'm a huge college basketball fan. I'm in the lead in my family bracket right now. But how the women in the women's tournament have been calling out the NCAA to the inequalities of their tournaments and the things made available to them, the weight rooms, the food, even their swag bags. And I was like, it was, even as a woman, I was like, whoa, I never even thought about that. And it's so true. And my eyes are still being opened up. But even in social media, like reading people saying things like, well, the men's basketball tournament brings in X amount of dollars. And it's like, it doesn't matter. There's a law that calls for equality and things like these. So it's actually been a dinner conversation between my partner and I. And I wanted to bring that because I think it's such a good example of like how those barriers still exist.
I was literally thinking about the NCAA thing as I was processing the question. And I think kind of the same with like women's soccer, right? I mean, they actually win and still don't get paid what men get paid. And so, I think I'll just say as a minority, you see it a lot, but I also say it's like if you paid attention to everything, you'd just be upset all the time. You really have to kind of get to a point where I'll kind of see just personally, I just presume ignorance. Like that's for me how it causes less harm. I'm going to defer and say you don't know any better. And if you did think in my mind, you would do differently, because you get bombarded with stuff every single day. And that's part of how I cope. And part of that is true. And when I say that, I mean, a lot of people are operating out of implicit bias, and it is not any intention to cause harm. And sometimes I'm really able to recognize that. I would say I have a social circle that is very diverse. We've had thorough conversations about different things that we've experienced. And there's just a lot of things that, you know, when it's not a part of your lived experience, you literally don't know. There's things we grew up saying and doing that even as a minority, like I didn't know it was okay not to say because I heard my parents saying it. Like I had no intention of causing harm, but we do what we're taught. So much of it is part of the culture. And I'm not saying that to excuse it. I'm saying that to give grace. Like that's how I choose to maneuver. Now, that being said, I also think we have the responsibility to call it out when we see it. And that's why I appreciate what they did at NCAA. It's like, okay, we're not going to create change by just ignoring it and saying this is just how it is. And so when I do see things that are occurring, I think it's important that me personally, if I feel I need to speak up, I need to speak up. Because if I say something, there's a 50-50 chance something's done. If I don't, it's 0%. And so part of it goes back to your personal values. One of mine is honesty. My coworkers will tell you I am very vocal. I say how I feel a lot. And part of it is just because for me, I'm very principled and I feel like, you know, right is right. And I feel like if that's not right, I'm going to say something. And that's just how I maneuver. I'm not saying that, you know, it's again, that's the only way. But I think in that, like when everything happened on January 6th, you know, I sent a message like to our staff saying like, this is how I feel, like this is where I am, and actually wanted to come together and talk as a group as counselors, not only to say, how do we help support students during this crazy time, but like, how do we support each other? Like I was like, I feel like I need the support of my coworkers right now because I don't really know how to process what just happened. And so I say that to going back to what Angela said, as far as the different avenues of support, you know, there's times where I need my coworkers, there's times where I may need my parents or my friends, or it may be external resources. Like that's a real thing depending on what's going on. And so I think it's building coalitions, you know, determining, like everyone can be an activist in some aspect. You don't have to be out there protesting to do that. Although if that's how you choose to do so, you absolutely can. I think sometimes we forget that, you know, there's just multiple ways to kind of speak your truth. And there's multiple platforms to do so. So I think figuring out what that looks like and how you want to approach it is important, and kind of doing things that's within your sphere of influence. We all have that. And so you don't have to be on a world stage to affect change. However, it is important that we do so in some aspects. And I will say, I feel like Generation Z, the generation that's coming up now, is super encouraging. They're very active, they're very vocal, and I'm encouraged to think that some of the stigma and stereotypes that are there, we're going to see that gap kind of shorten because they're willing to be out there and take the risk. They're willing to go forward with movements that didn't exist before. And so they're super creative in how they go about attacking different issues. And so for me, that's the highlight. It's, yes, there's a long way to go. You know, we have a lot to reach and we see a lot. I watched Picture as Scientists last week that the graduate school did for Women's International Month. And I was a scientist at UAB before becoming a counselor. And I could just really identify what the barriers of women in science. And I'll tell you, I was a research assistant. And in the 10 years I worked at UAB, I saw only one other Black female in that role. And so it is a stark thing of you're maneuvering in these environments, even in a place like UAB that we know is super diverse. It's the most diverse university in the state. And yet, you know, there's still gaps. And so that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. It's just to say that the higher, you know, certain fields, as you all know with STEM, there is less women, there's less minorities, you know, that's just a fact. And so we can create or affect change in all those areas as we continue to pursue them. My hope is that people have the heart to pursue them and not be discouraged by all the barriers that can exist. I hope they're able to find those that have conquered or rather persevered through those barriers to see it's possible, to see representation, and that gives this generation the courage to continue to pursue, even if they're one of the few that's doing so.
Kristina talked about her experience versus her male counterpart. And then I immediately thought of just my own experience as well, just being a female leader, and then the expectation that like I can't really have a social life or else I'll be viewed in a certain way. So taking out the working context, I have to always be serious and put my foot down, but you know, I can't also enjoy that social aspect that I feel like my male friends who are also leaders have. And that's also just like a discrepancy that I've faced. And then I think about the insecurities that I've felt just voicing my opinions too, knowing that whenever I've said something and it's like it's not heard and then it's repeated and then it's accepted. So I've also faced that as well that Kristina was mentioning. And then just seeing the social justice movements right now, especially with the Asian, just the Asian shootings, and also take into context the model minority myth and how females, especially Asian women, were taught to be quiet, or we have this proximity to whiteness. And then it's just really hard to get out of this racism and discrimination that females have faced. And I think what I would like to see is more solidarity, especially since we have UAB Champions Diversity promoting more of that, saying that we hear you and we see you and that we want to work together. And what are those efforts to be more inclusive and promote this environment for students to feel safe and welcomed? And Kiera mentioned just this Generation Z, like this generation of advocates are so different than years prior. I really attribute that to social media and how it's become more accessible. And we see that content creators are being very strategic to making information very digestible and engaging. So I see a lot of students reposting and resharing content that matters to them. And I think this will only grow in the future, seeing how just the movement of portraying information and providing this information for everyone in our community.
Kristina, I saw you unmute. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything on before we moved on.
I was going to add too, you know, listening to Kiera and then Angela, even the way we dress, I think, in the professional environment becomes a barrier. And I've even noticed, and I was kind of jokingly talking about it with my field. It's interesting. The field I work in is very male dominated, even though it was legit founded by women. And it seems to be the men that are, you know, more front and center. And a few years ago at a conference, I was jokingly saying, like, I'm just going to start wearing power suits because it's too difficult to find comfortable professional women's clothing. But I noticed that anytime I've got to go into an important meeting and I wear like a suit that's more masculine, like a vest, and I like ties, you know, the demeanor towards me changes. And I think it's just these little observations I've made over the years where I've had to strategically adjust how I approach certain situations. I just don't think many men have to strategically adjust to. It's just part of like societal acceptance for them. So that was just another thought that crossed my mind while we were thinking about different things in the workplace and being heard, and especially as a student leader too. I mean, I can see it's not just in the professional world, it's here as well.
No, I can definitely understand the, you know, the attire. I worked a retail job. We're still working retail, but at my previous retail job, we had actually switched managers to where we now had like a male store manager. And he pointed out that even though we sold crop tops and we sold shorts and we were allowed to wear them, you know, just as long as our company made them, he said that we weren't allowed to make them because we would distract the customers. And, you know, it was things like that and things targeted, you know, some specifically towards me that I wouldn't be able to wear certain things because it would attract the wrong attention. And that's what, you know, that wasn't what I was there for. And, you know, it was kind of like, that's not right. It's not right that they get to dictate those kinds of things, especially when there's a dress code. Like I can read, I know what it says. And so just, you know, having to be confided in those rules and just tied up and just it just makes me so mad. I can't. And I left that job though, just because I didn't want to take it anymore. And I really didn't want to be talked down to. And that's another big thing that, I don't know if anybody had mentioned that, but a lot of the time, we're supposed to get talked down to and be okay with it because, we're seen as like less because we're women. And it's kind of like, no, I was in a management position and I knew what I was doing. I was hired as a manager. So obviously they had enough faith in me to put me in that position. And I really didn't agree with, being talked down to and being disrespected. And whenever I would, whenever I would express how I was feeling and, that I was feeling disrespect and, tell him that's not okay, I would get ignored. I would get scheduled less. And it actually, my last week of work there, he actually reported me to HR because we had a meeting to where we had to nominate a couple of associates for different awards, and he nominated himself for 3 of them. And I told him, okay. I was like, well, how about we think about giving them to other people? I was like, that way, they help with the store as well. We can't just give them to the managers. And I got reported to HR because he felt that he was being attacked. And I was like, why is it so easy for you to report something and you automatically be heard? But I have all these instances and nothing's being done about it. And so I left the job, and it's more about knowing like where to draw the line as well in your workplaces, and knowing that you don't have to take, whatever people throw at you, especially if they're being disrespectful. So, sorry, moving on to a lighter note, I guess we're going to talk about my social impact initiative a little bit. So, of course, my social impact initiative as Miss UAB is the importance of voting. And I'd love to hear, some of your perspectives. So why do you think it's important to vote, but why is it important for women specifically to vote?
I love that is your focus. I need to say that. I'm trying to decide how vulnerable I want to be right now. And so bear with me for just a moment. This is a soapbox that I get on very often, and not just for women, but for everyone, young people, especially to vote. I lost my right to vote for a period of time since I turned 18. So I was not able to engage in that process. So I lost my voice in the democratic process in our country, in my state, in my city. And I had to fight pretty hard to get it back. And so I've never missed an election since the day that I got my right to vote back. And I'm here to tell you, it was in the 2008 presidential election. I was able to vote again for the first time. And I walked into my county's voting office. This was when I lived in Southeast Ohio. I cast my vote for the president and I wept. I mean, I stood there and cried at just the meaning and the enormity of being able to participate in that process again. And, why is it important for women to vote? Well, we're a country built by white men. And so and it's still very much dominated by those voices, and our laws are dominated by those voices, and there's decisions being made that affect us that are not being made by us. And so if we don't exercise that voice, and to be part of that process, like I love how Kiera said earlier, like there's a 0% chance if I don't say anything. There's some chance if I say something. And I feel like the more women get involved, especially young women, I think we're starting to see some shifts. And I love that we're having these discussions. Mom, if you watch this, I love you, but my mom is, we had a lot of discussion in the presidential election last year. We are not on the same political spectrum at all, and that's okay. We have really great civilized conversation about our differences. And one thing I learned was that for years, she's really just voted for whoever her partner voted for. And I was like, wow. And so we really got to talking, and then we really got to talking about issues, and we listened to each other. And she started to make like her own opinion, like her own choices. And I just thought that was such an example too of that generation, even before my generation, of that dependency so getting information from men. Like, I love my stepfather, but just the ability to make our own decisions today and be part of that process is not something I take lightly or take for granted. And I can't stress that enough, especially as a person who, within the last 15 years at one point did not have the right to vote and fought for it back.
So this is kind of my soapbox too. And I'll say, just as a minority, I think evidence of last election, it proves Black women make a difference when we show up to the polls and vote. And I'll kind of show this example. Colin Kaepernick did what he did in the NFL, and it got a lot of attention. And the number one thing that frustrated me is in one of the interviews, they asked, "Did you vote?" And he said no. And at that point, I said, this was not the last election, but the one before that, whenever all the stuff was happening in actives. And at that point, I said, none of what you did mattered. Because yes, it's great to demonstrate. We can do all the demonstrations we want. And if you don't educate yourself on things change from policy, legislation, from the local level on up, all that demonstrating is not going to matter at all. The one thing you could do to make your platform make a bigger difference and actually affect change was vote. And I would say until the last few years, I think for my community, it was always this, we want to make a difference, we want change, but why vote? Because it doesn't matter. And where I'm encouraged right now is, look at what LeBron James did is, yes, he used his platform, but then what was his goal? To have every NBA member registered to vote by the time last year's election came. That's how you progress. It's not just a movement where we talk, because talking isn't going to affect any change. It may inform, but that's not where the change happens. And so looking at what Stacey Abrams was able to do in Georgia, my encouragement, why I'm encouraged is, for the first time, we saw that when we do show up, it can make a difference. And that part's encouraging. What's occurred since she's done that is there have been Black women coalition groups that have been created in the South. I know Mississippi has one and Alabama has one, where they're trying to walk in the same spirit Stacey Abrams did to get more minority people registered to vote. And for my community, it's so important because there's been such a lack of apathy. And unfortunately, that is reflected on all the barriers we've hit in the past. And that's what I alluded to earlier when I said, if we can push through the barriers, we'll eventually get to change. And I don't say it lightly. When you get so much disappointment and it feels like change isn't happening, you can get apathetic. We all know that. But if we get apathetic and we don't do anything, we can for sure guarantee nothing's going to happen. And so it is continuing to push through despite the disappointments, despite the bills. And I really feel like this last year has shown evidence of that, and hope that in spite of all these voter suppression laws that are trying to be passed in 40-something states, I believe we're going to still rally the troops, as they say, and show up and figure out a way to overcome that. I obviously hope they don't get passed, but even if they do, I feel like that there's an energy on the ground floor that wasn't there before that is going to continue to perpetuate this movement and realizing we have a voice, and that more people are going to continue to jump on board and go forward. And so in our country, it's just so much we take for granted, as Americans in general, the democratic process. And I think if anything this year, it was shaken. And I'm hoping that occurring has lifted a fire under some people to say, no, democracy is important and I want to fight for it. And as a result, more people will show up to vote and do what they need to do so that we can continue, the uniqueness of our country, which is having a democratic platform. So I too am glad that you're focusing on this issue because it's important.
Well, as an Asian female and having Asian and Hispanic friends, I've had these conversations repeatedly, and many of my female friends just say we've never been taught or encouraged to vote, so we feel as if we've never been important from the beginning. And I will say, growing up, I didn't have any need or urge to vote because my parents weren't voters. So like, how do you help those of a marginalized population or group to feel as if they are important enough and like their voice matters in these elections? And being involved now, like I know that I have this platform to do that, but because what we've seen as a female in a young age, that it is male dominated, or that what are they going to do for us? Like we have these thoughts like they're not going to do anything even if we do vote. It perpetuates this narrative that like, it's very stagnant. We're not helping, and it's hard for legislators or government officials to identify our needs. So I really think social media, once again, has been very helpful in that, because people are posting about voting and you kind of feel as if it's kind of cool, and being an informed voter is sexy. So, I mean, just having this platform now is so important of what we want to create in the future as being females and as being leaders. Like, we need to encourage others, and we need to identify what populations are inactive so that we can work with them. So I think there are steps to do that, but female empowerment, we need to support each other and encourage that voting is essential to changing history, and then only promoting more initiatives to help for our communities now.
Absolutely. And for you guys thanking me for having this as my platform, there is absolutely no need to thank me, because the way that I saw it was there needs to be somebody in our community who has a platform and is willing to do this outreach. And I wanted to be that person. And so it's something that I felt compelled to do, especially since I've been politically aware from a very young age. My parents didn't become citizens until I was 9 years old. But before then, I knew what it meant to be scared, to have your loved ones taken away from you. And so having to pay attention to all of the laws, from such a young age, and creating your own opinions. And so I really just wanted to be heard. And being 16 in the 2016 election, it was something that I was very sad about, because I wanted to be able to voice my opinions, and nobody would listen to me because you're only 16. What do you know? And it doesn't matter if you're 16. It doesn't matter how young you are. You need to be able to form your own opinions. That way, when you do get old enough to vote, you'll be able to know what you believe in. You'll be able to vote for the future that you want and for the future that you deserve. And so I just felt so passionately about it. And so this is something that really, it was just so close to my heart, and that I felt like everybody should feel empowered through, because at the end of the day, your voices, your opinions matter. And we're the ones who are in charge of our future and of our government, because it is a democracy and we do have a say. So it's so important for me to be able to instill that confidence within my peers and within my community, so that they feel empowered to go out and vote for change, because you can hope and hope and hope, but hope isn't going to do anything except, get you to the polls, go out and vote. With that being said, if you're not registered and you're watching this, there's a link in my bio where you can register to vote, or you can visit vote.org to get registered and to see if you are registered and where you are. So I want to thank you ladies so much.